Hello my friends, this is umonox, and in today's umoTalk I want to speak about Elektron's new MK2 line of machines. If an upgrade for us existing users could be worth it? Yeah, and what I think about them in general. On June 29 they announced the introduction of the Octatrack MK2, and exactly 1 week later, on July 6, they announced the introduction of the Analog 4 and the Analog Rytm MK2. Yeah, more or less without a warning. No one really expected that in the first place, although rumors were around already. The introduction makes sense. Elektron has a Mark II history. If we have a look into the past, we can see that every bigger Elektron product, except for the SID station and the mono machine SFX6, which was a limited keyboard version of the mono machine, every bigger Elektron product got a Mark II version at some point. The machine drum got a Mark II upgrade in 2007 and the mono machine as well. And apart from the better outputs that were added to these upgraded versions, they also got the sequencer extended to 64 steps. Till date, the Elektron machines only had 32 steps in the sequencer, and they also got their height reduced so that they were a bit more flat now. In 2010, the machine drum UW and the mono machine got an additional plus drive upgrade as well, but that's not directly Mark II related, so anyway. Yeah, it makes sense. Now we have the Mark II versions of Elektron's current big boxes on the way, and no matter if one likes the new design or not, two questions obviously come to the table. What's new, and is an upgrade worth it? Now the specs themselves are all over the place already, so I will just quickly list them up here. I will also post a link to the Elektron website in the video description if you want to check them out for yourself. Basically, one can say, in the first place, the Mark II versions are primarily a hardware upgrade of the current Mark I models. They got the buttons and the OLED display that they've introduced with the Digitect. They added more buttons, so some functions have a shortcut in form of a dedicated button now. Yeah, and we have new outputs again, which they call impedance balanced outputs. I must admit, however, that I don't really have a clue how they differ from regular balanced outputs, you know. Anyway. Much more interesting in that respect is, while the Octatrack MK2 is basically still the same machine as before, it only got balanced inputs now, things changed on the Analog Four MK2 and the Analog Rytm MK2 when it comes to connectivity. Both have two dedicated CV inputs now, which can also take expression pedals. The Analog Rytm MK2 got an additional pair of inputs, and either this new audio in or the X in, which was there before, is now also a balanced input. On top of that, the inputs are not a single stereo jack anymore, but two independent mono jacks now. Some might love this decision. And the Analog Four MK2 has dedicated hardware outputs for each of its 4 tracks now, and those are stereo. So it basically got what made the analog keys stand out in that respect. With the Analog 4 MK1, we only get the individual outputs via overbridge. Now we have these as hardware outputs too. Yeah, and one question could also come up at this point. Will there be an Analog Keys Mark II? Yeah, but I must admit I have no clue. I don't know how well sales were going for the keys, but over the years I saw more analog keys being sold on second-hand market than analog 4s. In Germany at least, and I don't know if this is reflecting the overall sales for the machine or not, but I would assume that more analog 4s were sold overall, simply due to its form factor. However, don't take my words for granted, I really have no idea. I mean, considering that the Analog Rytm is newer than the analog keys and that the Analog Rytm gets a Mark II model as well, chances are that they don't make an Analog Keys Mark II. But yet again, just my thoughts about that. Don't blame me for this if I'm wrong in the end. Okay, back to the MK2s now. The Octatrack MK2 is basically just a hardware upgrade with additional buttons, and some additional functions are labeled on the knobs now. No new functions are inside the box. It also still has its compact flash card, but I can understand why they haven't changed this to a more modern SD card slot. If you upgrade, you can simply take all your samples and projects with you, plug the card into the new OT and start working right away. Makes sense to me. Yeah, on the Analog 4 and the Analog Rytm MK2, things are a little bit different, however. Those are not just hardware upgrades, they have also added new features. On the Analog 4 MK2, the analog circuits have been revamped. It also has an improved overdrive now. According to Elektron, this will deliver deeper and more defined bass, along with more bite and growl coming from that overdrive. Yeah. And on the Analog Rytm MK2, they added a new feature which might be the killer feature for a lot of people. The Analog Rytm MK2 is able to sample now. Yep. Yeah, it can sample. That's what I wanted on the Rytm from the beginning. Now it's there. So the Rytm MK2 can record from a dedicated new sampling input, and it can also resample itself. It also has larger pads, and generally both units are much larger now. But, and this has to be pointed out, with the new MK2 models of Analog 4 and Analog Rytm, Elektron also changed overbridge functionality. Both the Rytm and the Analog 4 MK2 now have Overbridge Basic and Overbridge Premium licenses, which is what were introduced with the Digitect. So right out of the box, you don't have the full Overbridge functionality with these new incarnations, but you have to pay approximately €100 or $90 on top to get it back. There's also a new quick performance feature added to both Analog Rytm and Analog 4 MK2. Yeah, okay, but enough talking about the new features now. This should only be a brief overview because the full specs are on their website, and especially for us Elektron users, a much more important question comes to the table. Is it worth upgrading our existing Mark I models? Does it make sense? And in that respect, questions come up which are not answered by the specs alone. People are talking about various things over at Elektrons already. A lot of them have very different questions, because we all use our machines differently. Yeah, I have my very own questions as well, primarily about the Octatrack and the Analog Rytm MK2, and so I decided to write Elektron a mail and ask them for answers to these questions. And 2 days ago, Frederick Alm from Elektron replied, and I want to share these infos with you now. Okay, because of Overbridge Basic and Overbridge Premium for the MK2 models of Analog 4 and Analog Rytm, I asked them if this will affect our existing Mark I models as well. Currently, our Mark I models have the full overbridge functionality with no limitations. So I wanted to know if the release of the new Mark II models would change that. And I have good news for all of us. Nope, it doesn't. Frederick said MK1 machines will have full overbridge functionality forever. Now I'm reassured now. Those are good news. Yeah, my next question was about OS update for the machines. I asked if Analog 4 and Analog Rytm Mark I and Mark II will share the same OS or if there are differences. And Frederick said, yes, the OS will support both MK1 and MK2 units. Good, so we do not have to maintain different operating systems, and for us Mark I users this means that we won't be left behind with new features that may come in the future. I assume that features like the sampling on the Rytm Mark II will then just be deactivated on the Mark I, but that's just an assumption, you know. Next up, I wanted to know some more specific things about the Analog Rytm Mark II in the first place. I asked if the sampling capability of the Rytm will be the same as the one found on the Digitect, meaning if it will be 33 seconds sampling time and mono only, or if it will be different and may even be able to record in stereo. Frederick said it will be very similar to the Digitect, but it will not sample in stereo. Now that was to be expected. A Rytm Mark II which can sample in stereo would scratch on the unique selling point for the Octatrack a little, since the Octatrack is the only machine in Elektron's lineup which works with and records stereo samples. Considering that they upgraded the Octatrack to a Mark II as well, and haven't discontinued it, it makes sense to not give the Rytm stereo sampling capability, from a selling point of view at least. But one could ask anyway, you know. So yeah, mono sampling only for the Rytm Mark II. And still, concerning the Rytm, my next question was about its new pads. I asked if they are reacting better now, if they added some velocity curves or something, so that we can adjust them to our taste and so on. But Frederick said, at the moment we don't have anything more to add than what's already been revealed. And this answer is a bit vague, I must admit, but it means to me that they made the pads bigger and maybe they also respond better now, but we don't get a configurable velocity curve for them, so they are the way they are, again. Okay, I'll take it like this. Now I had some questions about the Octatrack Mark II, and my first question was, have they touched the operating system of the Octatrack again, or is it really only a hardware upgrade here? And Frederick said, consider the Octatrack Mark II a strictly mechanical upgrade. And this also leads to my next question about the Octatrack Mark II, and this is something which would really make sense for the machine. I asked if they have added trick conditions to the sequencer, and Frederick answered, trick conditions are not planned for the OT Mark II. This, yeah. Yeah, this is a bit of a letdown, I must admit, because it would have made much sense to bring the Octatrack sequencer in line with the sequencer from the Elektron Machines, so that it's a round Mark II upgrade. Yeah, but the answer is quite clear. Nope, the Octatrack Mark II does not have trick conditions and it will not get them. Okay, so these were my questions and they are just top level. Others are going much deeper and asking much more detailed questions about the machines, and it does all make sense. But nonetheless, the important question about whether we should upgrade or not is still not answered. And there's probably no ultimate yes or no in that case. So if you are unsure about it and if you need some advice, here are my thoughts about this topic. Okay, when it comes to the Octatrack Mark II, the answer to the question is quite easy. If you own an Octatrack Mark I already, there is no need for an upgrade. Like Frederick said, it can be considered a mechanical upgrade only. It won't have new features like the trick conditions, and there's also nothing revamped on the software side of things. So yeah, it's more or less the same machine with new buttons and coders and a new screen only. Yeah, okay, and with balanced inputs now. But does this justify the pretty high price tag of 1,450 euros or $1,350 respectively? For existing owners of an Octatrack Mark I, probably not. I think you should ask yourself the following questions. Are you satisfied with your Octatrack Mark I? Is the workflow spot on for you? Do you get your stuff done, and is the screen okay for you? If you can answer at least half of these questions with yes, then you should not upgrade. It doesn't justify the money you have to pay for this upgrade. Depending on the country you are living in, you can expect to not get more than 800 or 900 euro for your used Octatrack in mint condition. And prices may drop even further now that people know of the Octatrack Mark II. So you would have to spend at least 600 euro on top to basically get the same machine. Yeah, I don't really think that new buttons, a new screen, a new crossfader and encoders, and new inputs alone really justify this, But then again, we don't know how well the new workflow works, thanks to these additional buttons, but I cannot imagine that all of this really justifies the price tag. So I would say for existing Octatrack Mark I owners, the upgrade is not necessary. And even if you always wanted an Octatrack, it's probably worth more to buy a used Mark I in mint condition, as prices may drop. However, if you had an Octatrack and if you returned it because you weren't really getting into its workflow, the Octatrack Mark II might be a fresh start with an old body again. But I would still wait for the comparison videos to arrive once the Octatrack Mark II is out, because I'm sure that people will do these and I'm also keen on checking them out. Yeah, and when it comes to the Analog 4 and the Analog Rytm MK2, however, the answer to the question of whether we should upgrade or not is not so easy anymore, because these are pretty solid upgrades by the looks of it, and especially the Rytm offers a brand new feature which could really turn it into one hell of a drum machine, if things go well. So if you are an Analog 4 user, it heavily depends on how satisfied you are with the sound of your Mark I model, I think. Yeah, the additional hardware outputs for all the 4 tracks are welcome addition, but what matters most with the synth, in my opinion, is its sound. And because Elektron has worked on the analog circuits of the Analog 4 MK2, they may not only added a bit more bass and beef to it, but they may also change the sound a little, in the context of that change, Now, we don't know if this is really the case because we haven't heard the Mark II yet, but I think it's at least possible. Now, just take me, for example. I was always very satisfied with the sound of the Analog 4. I never really had issues getting a good bass out of it, because the second filter in peak mode with high resonance placed at the right frequency spot literally blows every speaker away if you don't be careful. And a slightly thinner sound from the oscillators in general is working very good for me because I can simply mix these sounds better in a full arrangement, I also like the overdrive for the fact that it is not so crunchy. It adds a sonic character without moving into analog heat territory. So if you are satisfied with the sound of your Analog 4, just don't upgrade yet. Wait for proper sound examples or try it out on your own if you can. I may exaggerate a bit again, but even slight differences in the sound can sometimes matter and make a difference. But like before, if it's the other way around for you, if you are not so satisfied with your Analog 4 sound and if you don't want to always use the second filter just to get some necessary bass, the Mark II model will probably be for you and you should upgrade. But please keep in mind, we don't know how the model sounds yet. Maybe things turn out completely different and the sound of the new Analog 4 is so amazing that thinking about it is just not necessary anymore. One thing, however, will be true nonetheless. If your workflow is centered around your DAW, if you use all of the tracks with their individual outputs in the DAW via overbridge, and if you further process your analog firmware, you have to take into account that you have to pay an additional fee with the Mark II model to get this functionality back. And also, prices for a new Analog 4 Mark I have dropped significantly at the moment, so selling your Mark I model can lead to quite some loss of money because of this. And you may easily need to spend €800 or more to upgrade, plus €100 for the OB Premium upgrade if you are heavily relying on that DAW workflow. So you see, it's not so easy to decide here. Take your time to think about these topics first and really try to evaluate if it makes sense for you. But obviously, wait for proper sound demos first. Yeah. And finally, the Analog Rytm MK2. Now, Elektron has added a new feature to it. The Rytm MK2 can finally sample, and it can also resample. Sure, this is working in mono only, but those of you who own a Digitakt, or those of you who already tried it out, you know that sampling in mono isn't necessarily an issue. The effects on the Elektron machines are stereo, and they are also very great sounding effects, so they can easily give that mono sample the space it needs. And don't underestimate the power of resampling. It is a hell of a lot of fun to layer sounds on different tracks, mix and match them, and then resampling them into a single sample again, so you can use them on a single track. When I work with the Digitakt, I pretty much always work like this. I take the samples that come shipped with it, mix and match them up, change them, and then resample them to have them available on a single track again. With the Analog Rytm's analog drum engines and the fact that the samples can still be layered on top, this opens up whole new worlds of creativity and new ways of sound design not possible on the Rytm before. For me, personally, this is a big thing, and sampling from the external input is obviously nice as well, as this allows you to extend the sound palette even further. But that's not everything. Both the Rytm MK2 and the Analog 4 MK2 get a new feature they call Quick Performance Control. That's this button and this knob right here, I assume. Now, I haven't asked Elektron what this is, but I assume that those controls will either work as a shortcut for your preferred performances you have configured, for easy access from the front panel so to say, or that you can configure a whole new set of independent performances here and change them on the fly with this button while you tweak them with this knob. Now either way, while this quick performance control is not so important on the Analog 4 MK2, in my opinion, it could be a huge deal on the Rytm MK2 when it comes to live performances. Why? I tell you. It's because of the fact that the Rytm operates in different modes, and its pads are used to control these modes. You have the mute mode, the scene mode, and the performance mode, for example. Yeah, and in a live situation this leads to a problem. You may have some performances configured, risers, drops, whatever, but you primarily work with just a few patterns and you therefore need the mutes a lot. So you run into the issue that you need mutes and performances at the same time. While this is not a problem on the Analog 4 because its mutes are on the tricks from the sequencer and the performances are up there, easy to be used at the same time. Yeah, while this is not a problem on the Analog 4, it is an issue on the Analog Rytm, as the performances and the mutes share the same pads. With these quick performance controls on the Rytm MK2, you might be able to solve this problem. You can stay in mute mode and control your performances from up there. And if we have a closer look, it seems that there's even some sort of an additional mute mode available with these quick performance controls. Yeah, I'm excited to see how this works. That's available on the Analog 4 as well, by the way. So yeah, invaluable additions, I think. I always had my issues with the modes on the Rytm. This thing alone could be a game changer for me already. So the question is, should you upgrade your Rytm to the Mark II then? And my answer is yes, I think that the Analog Rytm Mark II is the most satisfying upgrade Elektron has on offer, from a specs point of view at least. Quick performance controls make sense on it due to the problems with its modes, and sampling is obviously a big thing. Overall, the Rytm Mark II seems to offer a very round upgrade. But still, if you are centered around the DAW workflow and you use your Elektron machines primarily as sound sources in your DAW, and therefore do not care so much about all of these things, but do care about the full OB functionality, you must consider that you have to pay an extra fee for getting this functionality back once you upgrade. So if you can live without the sampling and if you don't care about the performances and stuff because you never used them, the upgrade doesn't make sense for you. Now I don't know if the sampling input on the Rytm MK2 can be used as an additional source inside the DAW as well, with OB Premium of course. Yeah, but that's something we get to know later when the machine's out. Okay, so these were my thoughts about the new machines from Elektron and whether you should upgrade or not. I hope this video helped you out a little bit and I hope you liked it. And if that was the case, let me know in the comments. I wish you all the best, my friends, and I see you in the next video. Bye!